Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, the channel where we are making a computer role-playing game using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. What I want to talk about in this video is a model for dealing with encounters with monsters, and more specifically a model for dealing with random encounters. And what I mean by random encounters is encounters where you, the game designer, don't specify exactly what's going to happen. There are probably going to be, in your game, particular characters that you definitely have to meet, and you want to specify all of the possibilities for that encounter. But there might also be others where you don't specify in exact detail what happens. So you might have, all right, you're going through the forest and you might meet some wolves. You might get attacked by some wolves, or there might be some goblins in the forest, or etc. Or there might be nothing, and it's partly left up to chance. It'll be different in different plays of the game, and you don't necessarily need to specify every detail of what happens. And when I say an encounter, I'm not talking about combat, if that should ensue. I'm sort of talking about the stage before that, where you determine if, okay, are the monsters going to attack, or are they going to be, more friendly, or are they going to demand money, or are they going to offer you gifts, or whatever. In some games, of course, you don't have that stage. You just sort of meet a monster, and that's the default, is that you meet a monster and fight it, and that can be fine. But I think that it can be slightly more interesting to have sort of negotiation and have the possibility of friendly relations and so on. And that's what I want to talk about today. So we're here at the starting screen. Let's choose to be a human. And I've added an attribute, but otherwise this screen is as it was in the last video. I'm going to choose to move quickly, which is the red arrows, because I'm going to show you the system that I've come up with for encounters that happen when you're moving quickly. The model is quite big and complicated, so I'm going to sort of talk about it over at least 2 videos. Now I've set it up for demonstration purposes. I've set it up so that you will have an encounter immediately, but of course in a real game, you would wander around for quite a while before you met anyone. So let's click that, and we say you enter a settlement before you notice it's there, which of course is what happens when you're moving quickly. And I've slightly changed the system for rolling dice. Instead of rolling and then comparing to an attribute, you roll and then add an attribute. So in this case, we rolled a 13 and we added our size attribute, which is 12, and that gave us a total of 25. And it says the monsters are not sure what to do. The way this is set up is that if the total was low, the monsters would attack, and if the total was very high, the monsters would run away. And this is the result of sort of more middling options. We have the option to be humble, informal, formal, or haughty. I'm going to choose to be formal. So we spend 45 minutes in formal negotiation, and that matters because one of the variables that we're keeping track of is how much lamp oil we have. So we've just used up 45 minutes worth of lamp oil. So I rolled a 15, and I should say that when it rolls, it's the equivalent of rolling a 20-sided dice. So it'll generate a number. Obviously, it's not really rolling anything. It's randomly generating a number between 1 and 20, but I'll call it rolling. It rolls a 15, and we add our intelligence, which is 12, and that gives us 27, and that's quite high. So it says the monsters allow you to pass through their territory and offer to trade. So let's do maybe a couple of other goes just so we can see some of the other options, and then I'll talk you through the code. So here we're playing an elf. Zip, go that way again. We enter a settlement, or you enter a settlement before you notice it's there. We rolled a 1, which is not great, plus our size of 6 is 7, and that gives us a very low total, so the monsters attack. Let's do one more. See what happens. And once again, we didn't roll very well, and we don't have a very good or very high size attribute, and so we got a 9. So let's go through the code. Pull this up. Hang on, sorry. Oh my goodness, there we go. Okay. So as a side note, sometimes your game will get quite big and sprawling, and you'll have things off to one side, and you won't be able to. You'll sort of look around and not know where stuff is. So it's probably quite good to know that there's this option. If you go to Passage, which is the sort of the main window most of the time, and you choose to go to, it gives you the option to type in the name of a page, and then when you start, it gives you options that you might be talking about. I'm talking about roll and add, so I click that, and then it'll take you straight to that particular page, and you can find where you need to be. So a lot of this, it's starting to get a bit more complicated, as you can see, and this is more what a real game looks like, and it's going to get more complicated still. So it can be, as I say, hard to find things. A lot of these are just the same as they were last video, so the data is just setting up the variables. You choose your race, it creates your character, rolls your attributes, make sure they're the correct total, and this is really where we this gives us the map. This is really the new bit, so I'm going to start from here. So when we enter here, Z will have a value of either 0.25 or 0.5. What that indicates is how much lamp oil we're going to use up in this particular move. LO is lamp oil measured in number of hours. If lamp oil is 0.25, that indicates the player's moving quickly, and we say that they enter a settlement before they notice it's there and go to stumble. And the other option is that they're moving slowly and they see a settlement up ahead. And if you're moving slowly, that gives you some options which are advantageous. You can just quietly retreat before they see you, or you can sort of spend some time watching them to get a feel of them, and so on. But that's for a future video. So we're going to assume that you go this way and stumble into them. And the first thing we do is set Z to 7 and include roll and add. Now that set Z equals 7 just means which variable are we going to be adding when we roll. If we look at this data, we can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is SIZ, which is size. So that tells us that we're going to be rolling and adding our size. So we include roll and add. I'll go to roll and add and go through it, but that will give us a number which is stored in the variable x. If x is less than 15, the monsters attack. If x is more than 25, the monsters run away, and we have the option to just continue on or loot the settlement. And if neither of those are true, in other words, we've got a sort of middling result, the monsters aren't sure what to do, and we go to posture, which is where we choose whether we're going to be humble or haughty or whatever. And we set this variable u to be stumble, and that just indicates that we're going to get a penalty, because if you approach them slowly, I think that's probably going to have better results. It feels more realistic to think that would have better results than just sort of stumbling in and looking around and going, oh, I'm surrounded by monsters. So let's look briefly at roll and add. It's quite straightforward. It's what you might think. We set y to be a random number between 1 and 20, so that's the dice roll. Now, instead of printing a load of text, I've set it to a variable, a string, which down the bottom of the screen gets printed. And the reason I've done that is because I kept getting errors when I was printing span up here, which is the beginning of the paragraph, and printing span down here. It didn't seem to be able to connect the two of them. I think because there's this code in the middle. Sometimes you can have it print a line of text that's perfectly well formatted, but if there's sort of code in the middle, it can't link something that's on one side of the code with something that's on the other side of the code. So I ended up having to put all of that text into this variable and print it out later. That's why it's done like this. So we go span style equals color red. That just means this paragraph is going to be printed in red. These slashes are used when you're going to put double quotes in. It just tells the computer that the character that follows, just treat it as a character to be put into W. Don't, because otherwise it would treat it as the end of this. It would go, here's some quotes, here's some characters. Yep, these are all characters. Ah, there's more quotes. That must be the end of the line. Well, we don't want it to be the end of the line. We just mean that we want these double quotes to be part of the string. So that's what that slash indicates. And then that's the same thing there. So we have span style equals color red, rolled a whatever you rolled. Normally we'd go into here. We set X to be the roll plus the relevant attribute, and then we add onto the text the name of the attribute, and then a bracket, the value of the attribute, another bracket, and then just the end of the paragraph and a couple of line breaks. So it'll give us something like we rolled a 7 plus strength, bracket 15, equals 22. The only complexity is this one here. Sometimes we might want to roll and there's more than one variable that is important. And I decided that when you're trying to sneak around and not be seen, the dexterity, you should add dexterity, but you should also subtract your size, because if you're bigger, you're more likely to be spotted. So the way we cope with that is we say if Z is AN plus 1, well, AN is attribute number, and remember Z is normally which attribute we're using. So obviously if Z is higher than the number of attributes, well, if we treated that normally, we'd go to AVZ and there'd be nothing in there, of course. So we've set it up to tell the computer, well, that's a sort of special case, and that means instead of adding AVZ to X, add AV3, which is our dexterity score, and then subtract AV7, which is our size score. And we update the text to be to indicate that fact, to print that instead of printing strength 15 or something, it'll be dex minus size, and it'll give the total there. And then because this is an include, we don't need to put any goto or anything, because we've, instead of gotoing it, we've included it. So the computer knows that once it goes through roll and add and runs out of text to execute, just go back to this page. So we'll have a variable X, which will be a d20 plus our size attribute. If X is less than 15, the monsters feel confident to attack us. If X is over 25, they run away, and if it's a middling option, they see what we have to say for ourselves. I just want to briefly look at looting the settlement. because if you run away, you can continue, and continue currently just takes you to a blank page because I haven't sort of got up to programming that bit. But if you decide to loot the settlement, one of two things will happen with an equal chance. You loot the settlement and leave before the monsters return. Now, obviously, normally that would change some variables. You'd get some gold or you'd find some items or something like that. But I haven't sort of decided exactly how much treasure or what is the treasure that's going to be used in this game. So I've just sort of just put the text and left the variables for later. Otherwise, if we're not lucky, the monsters return before we finished looting them, and then we say set z equals an plus 1 and include roll and add. Well, as I said before, an plus 1 is a special case, which means roll and add dexterity and minus size. And then if we roll, if the total is more than 12, we get away. If the total is less than 8, they beat us up and kick us out. And again, that should involve a change in attributes. Perhaps our constitution would go down, or perhaps we'd have a separate hit points variable. But again, I haven't sort of coded that yet. I haven't quite decided how that's going to work. Or we have the middling result, which is we get away with the loot, but also get wounded. Now, you might notice the numbers are a little bit different here. The numbers were a lot higher in the previous one. Well, that's because if you're rolling and then adding an attribute, that's probably going to be an addition of about plus 10 or something around like that. But if you're adding dexterity and taking away size, well, that's going to be probably around 0 because they're both on roughly the same scale. So we have to sort of scale the numbers to account for that fact. Anyway, that's looting. Let's say that they don't attack us, they don't run away. Instead, they sort of want to know what we have to say for ourselves. And so we have a choice of postures. We can be humble, informal, formal, or haughty. And we should remember that if we've gotten to posture, we've got this variable u, which is set to stumble, which will, as we'll see, give us a penalty. Whereas if we had gone this way, if we found them, because we were moving slowly and we didn't sort of blunder into them, we wouldn't have that penalty. So that will send us to one of these four, which are all very similar, but I will go through them anyway. Humble, we will lose between 1 and 3 points of will for being craven. Perhaps we sort of it sticks in our craw that we're grovelling to these monsters or something like that. But in this case, we'll go to roll and add. We'll actually go to roll and add in all of these. The differences are just the numbers and the attribute that's used. In this case, if we're grovelling, it's to do with size. And we have, this is where the penalty comes in. If u equals stumble, we set x to be +4. Normally a plus like that would be a bonus and a minus would be a penalty. But in this particular case, we're rolling against size, and the idea that I had in my head is that the smaller you are, the better you are at being humble is like saying, look, you don't want to kill me, I'm small and pathetic, and it wouldn't sort of bring you any honour. And it seemed to me that would be easier if your size was smaller. So in this particular case, we want to roll low because we want to have a low size attribute to be good at this. So a plus is a penalty in this particular case. And then it assigns a value to z based on x, which is the total of the roll. So if x is less than 22, we get that. All right, what if it's less than 25, we get that. Less than 28, we get that. Less than 31, we get that, etc. So we'll have a number from 1 to 5, and we'll see what that means when we include Diplo, which is the next screen here. 1 is that they become enraged and attack you. 2 is they tell you to come back the way you came or you'll have to fight them. 3, they tell you that you have to pay for passage through their territory or leave, or you can again fight them. 4, you can pass through their territory. 5, you can pass through their territory and they offer to trade with you. Now, of course, all of these, as you can see, it prints text and then the game ends. But of course, none of those would end the game. It's just that I'm only demonstrating the model of diplomacy. And so we've sort of that part of the game has ended. We've determined what the monster's attitude to you is going to be, and now it's up to you to continue the adventure. I won't deal with 6 or 7 yet because they're specific to one of the postures. They can only happen in one of the postures. If we go to informal, we'll see very, very similar things, except that the penalty for stumbling is -4 because in this case a high roll is good and a low roll is bad. And then we set you to be a dash to prevent this code triggering a second time when it's not warranted. And we notice that the value of Z is different. It's using a different attribute. An informal approach relies on charisma. A humble approach relies on size. A formal approach relies on intelligence. And a haughty approach relies on willpower. And again, we have what result happens is assigned based on particular numbers. Formal is exactly the same, except that you will spend a certain amount of time engaging in formal negotiation. It's slower than other things, and because we have this lamp that's kind of running out, that can be quite important. It'll cut short the time that we have in the dungeon, or it might actually cost us the game because we spend 30 minutes negotiating and we didn't have that much lamp oil left. But assuming that we do have enough lamp oil, it works exactly the same. There's the penalty. We have a different attribute, and we have different numbers. The difference is the ranges of numbers are that the humble approach is the easiest, but it has a penalty. And then the formal approach is sort of the next one, but it has a sort of lesser penalty. It wastes a certain amount of time. The informal approach is less likely to succeed, but it doesn't waste time and it relies on a different attribute. And then the haughty approach is the least likely of all to get results, but it has these special results of 6 and 7, and I'll show you what those do now. So we've got up to, if Z equals 5, they let you pass through the territory and offer to trade. If Z equals 6, the monsters present you with gifts and allow you to pass through the territory. And if, else, which will be that Z equals 7, the monsters present you with gifts, allow you to pass through their territory and offer to trade. So 7 is a sort of better version of 5 and 6 is a better version of 4. And you can only get that by taking a haughty approach, sort of presenting yourself as this important personage. And if they believe you, which partly depends on sort of how high your willpower is, they will treat you accordingly. They present you with gifts as well as giving you leave to continue. So the reason I've got these 4 possibilities is that hopefully it will create interesting decisions. And an interesting decision is a decision that isn't obvious what you've got to do, but you can work out what to do if you think about it for a bit. If it's obvious what the best choice is, that's kind of boring and it might as well not be a choice. And if it's too hard to work out what to do, that's not really interesting either, and the player is essentially picking at random. What you want is they can't immediately see what's the best option, but if they think about it for a bit, they can get a pretty good idea of what's the best option. Because all four of them rely on different attributes, it'll partly depend on what attributes are highest, but it's not just as simple as, well, my intelligence is the highest, so I'll go with formal, or my charisma is the highest, so I'll go with informal. There's also the ranges of numbers are different, so you've got to adjust for that, but also there's specific penalties and advantages. The humble approach will cost you willpower, the formal approach will cost you time, and both of those might be quite important, depending on, if they're low, you might really want to conserve those. So even if your size is very small and you know that a humble approach is going to work, if your will is low, that might not be a good idea for you. And similarly, a formal approach, even if your intelligence is very high, if you're running low on time, that might be too much of a risk for you. A haughty approach is the hardest, but it can get you results that nothing else can get you, because you have those results 6 and 7, which they sort of present you with gifts, which again, obviously, variables should change, and they don't, because I haven't worked out exactly how the economy of this game is going to work. But so hopefully the best result, the best strategy will be different for different characters, but also it won't just be, okay, I've got a charisma character, so formal approaches, I'll just do that every single time and I don't have to think about it. Hopefully they will have to think about it, but hopefully it's not so obtuse that no amount of thinking about it is going to help them. That's the space that I think you want to be in with the player's decision making. And whether it gets into that space, I don't know yet. I'll have to sort of play test it a lot more and get other people to play test it to see. But that's what I'm aiming for, and that's why I've tried to do that. So coming up, of course, I want to deal with this, but this sort of side of the encounter. But that would have made the video too long if I'd programmed that and dealt with it in this. So I will leave it there. I hope that has been of interest or use to at least some of you, and I hope that you will tune in next time.